or watch it again. So just to let you know that as well. But a little bit about us. Like I said, I've introduced myself and Kathy. We are the directors at Thrive Aged Care, and we work and partner with organisations who support older people and people living with dementia to really help those organisations, those teams, those people working in those teams to thrive. So building workforce capability through training, like we're doing today, working with organisations to review the services that they're providing and helping to support people to make improvements. And specifically, we do quite a bit of work in the area of dementia, and that is through our training, which is a positive approach to dementia care. So we're excited to have you all online today to really talk about how we can strengthen communication for people living with dementia. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we start. I've mentioned that today's session will be recorded, and we will also send you a copy of the slides, so don't feel like you have to take heaps of notes. Thank you so much for putting yourself on mute. It really does help as a presenter when I don't hear other noises distracting my brain, so I appreciate that. But we will have the opportunity to ask any questions today, so please make sure you can use the chat function. If you can't use the chat function, that's fine. Just pop your hand up and we can answer any questions that you've got, and we will have some time for questions at the end as well. But today is all about talking about communication. Yeah, so we've got a bit to cover today, and really we could dedicate a whole day to this topic about how we improve the way we communicate for people living with dementia. But we've only got a short time, so we're just going to really kick off the conversation and thinking about what we can improve in that space. But what we will cover today is we will start with the strengthened aged care standards that are now coming, I believe, 1 of November. So we've got a little bit more time now to prepare for those new aged care standards that are coming. We will talk about communication in general and start thinking about what areas of the brain are responsible for communication. And we also will start thinking about the changes that are happening for people living with dementia and how that might play out with what you see supporting people in your roles in the community. And we're also going to touch on responsive behaviours and communication. So there's, a term called changed or responsive behaviours, and we're going to think about how we, as the person supporting the person living with dementia, communicate with them and how that might trigger changed behaviours as well. I'm going to take a breath. We're going to jump into the chat. So we'd love to hear just who's come along today. So if you can open the chat while you're listening to me and just tell me where you're from and how you support people living with dementia, that would be great. And Kath's going to make sure she monitors the chat and help me out as well. So pop on and introduce yourself. That would be great to hear about who we've got here today. Thanks, Kath. So the new aged care standards are coming, and oh, thank goodness I didn't have the date on this slide, because we've just heard from the Commission that they're being pushed back 3 months. So the new strengthened aged care standards and the Aged Care Act that was meant to be rolled out the 1st of July is now being pushed back to the 1 November, which is great. It gives us a little bit more time for us working with older people to get ready. And there's a key, really strong focus with the strengthened standards on dementia and how we support people living with dementia and how we communicate with people living with dementia. So it's great, because that is an area that, we really do need to focus on and work on. So having that in the standards is fantastic. Now we know that communication or lack of communication or miscommunication is a big contributor to incidents that we might see, whether they're behavioural incidents or clinical incidents. And quite often it's the reason that we get complaints in aged care or in community care through lack of communication. So the new standards focus on communication for people with dementia, and they do that through not just one of the standards, but as you can see here, 3 of the different areas. So standard 1, which is really understanding individuals' communication needs and preferences. Standard 3, which really gets specific and talks about people living with dementia and all people who have difficulty communicating, and making sure we can communicate with people verbally and non-verbally effectively. And then standard 5, which is the clinical area, which really talks about clinical frailty, communication barriers, and making sure that, I guess, we're providing care and services in a way that really optimizes someone's independence and really works with their strengths and skills. And that's what we're going to focus on today as well. Thanks for popping in the chat your introduction. Nice to meet you all. And yes, we can see that you're working in the community and supporting people in memory cafes, which is awesome. Like I said, if you've got any questions as we go, please feel free to pop them in the chat. So let's start with communication in general. Now, communication is actually very complex. We do it every day. Yeah, we can probably do it with our eyes closed. And we probably don't think about how complex it really is. But this model here gets you to start thinking about how complex communication is. I don't want to go into this model in full detail, but we just want to highlight the steps involved in successful communication for people who have no brain change. Yeah. So step 1 is all about coming up with an idea. Yeah. You as the sender, the message sender, has an idea that you want to communicate. And the idea will be influenced by lots of different things in your environment. What you see will trigger, an idea that you want to communicate. And the first thing is, as a sender, you must clarify the idea and the purpose of your communication. What do you want to achieve? And how is that person that you're communicating to going to perceive that message? Yeah, because we are really great at making sure we communicate in a way that someone understands. Yeah. So if I'm talking to my 5-year-old, I would communicate in a different way, perhaps, than I would communicate to my husband. Yeah. Because as the sender, I'm tailoring the way that I communicate for that person on the other end to understand. Yeah. So that's step 1. That takes a lot of brain function. Step 2 is about encoding the message. Okay, so the idea has to be put into words or symbols or gestures, because we know that communication isn't just words. And we know that no two people interpret information in exactly the same way. So as the person who's sending the information, I've got to be careful to make sure I'm choosing words or symbols or gestures that are commonly understood. So I'm going to reduce the chance of miscommunication. Okay, so this means that I need to be aware of the receiver's communication skills. Yeah, not only their skills, but maybe their attitudes, their experiences, what culture they're from. And I would be aware of that and use all that information to adapt the way I'm going to code my message. Already you can see it's quite complex. Step 3, we haven't even got to message transmission yet, but that's what we're up to now. Yep. How do we transmit the message? Will it be verbal, written, visual? And for clear communication to occur, the medium and the message must match. Yeah. And then step 4 is the decoding. So when the message reaches the other person, they need to decode it so they can understand what I'm trying to get across. Yeah. They might have to translate words, symbols, or my gestures. And because no two people interpret information in the same way, if a message is not decoded correctly, it can lead to misunderstanding, can't it? Yeah. So successful decoding is more likely to occur when that person receiving the message, gets it in a way without distractions, where they can fully interpret what I've said to them or the signals that I'm using, and they can understand what's being said. And the last part of this communication is feedback. Yeah, and feedback occurs when me as the sender and the receiver check in to understand that the message was understood. Yeah, so I check in to say, did you understand what I meant there? And the person receiving the information can let me know as well. So it could be verbal, do you have any questions? Or it could be visual, a thumbs up, and the person gives me a thumbs up. So we can see here how complex communication is. It requires a lot of different parts of our brains to be firing for really successful interaction, and that by both people, by the person sending the message and by the person interpreting the message. Now, I realised, that I skimmed over a slide. I don't know how that happened, but before I talked about that, I really should have gone into what communication is. Yeah. And you can see here, there are some different definitions here. And all those definitions, what we've done is bolded some words. So we've really started with, it's an exchange of information. Yeah. But it's not just information, it can be the sharing of feelings or ideas, yeah, or behaviors. Yeah. It's a process where information is exchanged between two people or more than two people. And the way that we do that might be not only through words, but through symbols, signs, gestures, or behaviors. And looking at the pie chart, you'll see that only 7% of communication is actually words. So most of the way that we actually communicate is through our body language, our movements, our expressions, what we do with our face, our arms, our hands. Yep, that is all communication. So 38% of how we communicate actually has to do with our voice as well. So our tone of our voice, the pitch, the volume, the pace, all these things convey emotions or might be used to emphasize different points. So you can already see that our everyday communication is much more than just words. Yeah. So I've got a question for you now, and I'd like you to have a think about it and pop it in the chat. Why do you think it's important to adapt our approach for people living with dementia? Why is it important that you think that we need to adapt the way we communicate for people living with dementia? Pop your ideas in the chat. I can see Sandra typing. Thank you. Yeah, the way it's understood or perceived or not understood. Yeah. So we as the sender can adapt how we communicate to make sure there's a better chance of what we're trying to get across to be understood. Yeah. And the brain doesn't process those things in the same way anymore. Exactly. So the person living with dementia is going through brain change. And us having an awareness of that means that we can adapt the way that we get our message across. Yeah. So exactly. So communication, what you're seeing here, the 7% words, the 38% tone, the 55% movement, this is the same for people living with dementia. It's not different, okay? So in fact, what you will learn today is words become even less important, and people living with dementia actually rely more and more on body language and our voice modulation rather than words. So that's why it's important that we're really cautious of how we communicate and how we can adapt and tailor that for people living with dementia. It's so important to smile and touch. Exactly. It is, isn't it? Yeah. All right, now I'm going to move on to a slide of the brain. So that's your trigger warning there. Okay, we're going to see an image of the brain. And here it is. Let's have a look at the brain. So we know that the brain is made up of two parts, our left and right hemisphere. Okay, so go ahead and you can put your fists together. And the left side controls what our right side does, and our left, it's vice versa. Yeah, the right side controls what the left side does. So the brain is really, really complex. Yeah. And here we can see two brains. Okay, they are from two different men, roughly the same age, height, and head circumference at death. Okay, the brain on your right, I always have to double check that, is from a man that died in an accident with a healthy brain. Okay, the brain on your left is from a man that died from complications of living with Alzheimer's for over 10 years. What do you notice about the two brains? Pop in the chat what you notice, what the differences might be. Exactly, atrophy of the brain, wonderful atrophy. So we get a lot sometimes that it looks shrunken or smaller or like a raisin, people will say. Yep, atrophy, that's exactly it. Okay. Smaller color. Yeah, color change, exactly. Yeah. I can see that you're typing, Sandra, so we'll wait for that. I'll go back to that image. Exactly. Yeah, it's a big difference, isn't it, with the weight? Yeah, that's huge. My maths is like that's losing 5 times, isn't it? Yeah. So we're seeing big change in size, big change in color, big change in maths, weight. Yeah. A lot of people will also point out things like gaps. Yeah, there looks like there's gaps between the matter. So we're seeing gaps or holes, these dark spots here. Yeah, between the hemispheres, this looks a bit bigger. So we've got lots of structural changes going on in the brain. And we haven't even started to think about what chemical changes are going on in that brain either. Yeah, but there's lots of structural, chemical, physiological changes going on in the brain. Now, if we think back to communication, lots of areas of the brain have a role to play in communication. Yeah, not just the ones we typically think of either. And now that we know a little bit about the communication loop for both the sender and receiver, we can start to really think about what areas might be involved in that loop. So I want to start with the occipital lobe, and I want you to pop your hand right at the back, the base of your head here. This is your occipital lobe. This is your vision processing center, okay? And we know already that 55% of communication is visual. Through body movements and facial movements, you've got to have the ability to see, yeah, how the other person is trying to convey the message. So thinking about that, how would the changes that we're seeing to the brain impact someone living with dementia in terms of visual processing? What would you expect to see there? Pop your comments in the chat. While you're doing that, thinking about what changes are happening with visual processing and how that might impact on communication. Not interpreted accurately, exactly. Yeah, so difficulty interpreting what you're seeing. Yeah, because we take in information through our eyes, it travels all the way back to the occipital lobe, and it might take more time because we don't have the connections close together, or it may not be interpreted the way that it was intended. Yeah, yeah, great. All right, we're going to think about the left temporal lobe now. So if you take your fingers and you were to push them in here on your left side, that's your left temporal lobe. And it has a huge role to play in communication. It has a huge role in both sending verbal comms and through word finding, our vocab, yeah, and also through the production of speech, the actual production of words. So the left temporal lobe is responsible for vocab, speech production, and comprehension for understanding or interpreting the messages coming through as well. And we can see there, you know, with the changes happening to the person living with dementia, there's going to be impact on that left temporal lobe. The other area I want you to think about is the hippocampus, this little area circled here, which actually lies really deep under the temporal lobe. But your hippocampus is your memory center and it helps you to connect memories and emotions. And it's the area that's involved in making meaning of what you see or hear. For instance, if you see a dog, yeah, you might associate it with a friendly memory. But someone else wouldn't necessarily associate that with a friendly memory if they had a negative experience or memory with the dog. Yeah. And lastly, the other area I want you to think about is your frontal lobe here. And that's your executive functioning center. This is our thinking brain. This is where we take information from the world around us, including communication, and we process it to make a decision. Yeah, it is what we use to form communication and to respond. And it's the area responsible for planning, organizing, self-regulation, seeing other people's point of view. Yeah, so you can see here there's lots of areas of the brain involved in communication, either as a sender or receiver. So thinking about a person living with dementia and the changes that we're seeing with the brain and looking at this image, how do you think communication might be affected? Yeah, pop what you think, how it might be affected in the chat. Okay, we're going to go on and delve a little deeper into language. Okay, and the first thing that we want to talk about is dementia does not affect hearing. A person living with dementia might have age-related or other changes to their hearing. However, this will not be caused by dementia. Okay. Okay, so moving on. Early in this, people will miss out of 4. How long got lost, do you think? Early in this, people will miss out of 4. How long before got lost do you think? Kath, why aren't they getting this? Early in this, people will miss 1 out of 4. How long before got lost do you think? Early in this disease, people will miss 1 out of 4 words. How long before you got lost do you think? Yeah. Okay. Makes it really hard to understand things when you miss 1 in every 4 words. Yeah. How did you feel when I got louder? Or how did you feel when my tone got a little bit angrier? Yeah, so frustrated. Yeah. So we know hearing doesn't change with dementia, although a person can have age-related changes. And I did sound annoyed. My brain was trying to catch up. I know you're trying to catch up and you're like, why does she sound so rude? People with dementia can still hear tone. They can still hear pitch. They can still hear volume. They can still hear intensity. What changes is their ability to understand language. Yeah, yeah. So unless someone like cares a whole awful, nothing is going to get. It's not. Unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better. It's not. Yeah. So the images here are of that temporal lobe that we talked about, left and right. Yep. The temporal lobe is the area of the brain that helps you understand the world around you and helps you respond to it. And you'll notice that the left side is more affected by the right with dementia. Okay. Yep. So the left side is where people will lose skills, and the right is where they still will retain some strength. And when we think about that, this is what each temporal lobe is responsible for. So go ahead and grab your 3 fingers on your left hand and put them on your temporal lobe. Yeah. And I want you to say the left temporal lobe is in charge of 3 things. It's in charge of vocab, comprehension, and speech production. Okay, these are our skills. Yeah. But these are the things that people living with dementia will lose. They will lose these skills. On the right temporal lobe, we have 5 strengths. Okay, and these are things that people retain. So forbidden words, yeah, all that naughty language, swear words, sex talk, racial slurs, ugly words, they're things that are retained. Okay, social chit chat and turn taking. Hey, Kath, how are you? Yeah, I'm good. That's retained. Production and understanding of rhythm of speech, frequency, intensity, and volume. Yeah, so when I got annoyed or I talked faster or my pitch changed, that's retained. People know that. They don't know you might not know what I'm saying, but you'll know I'm sounding angry. Yeah. Or you'll know I'm asking a question. Yeah. Would you like tea or coffee? Because you can hear the inflection. Okay. Music, poetry, prayer, and counting, that is retained on the right side. And the other thing that is retained is automatic autonomic movements. Yeah. So the things you do without thinking. So if I was to do this, what might you do? You might stick your hand out and shake my hand. Yeah, they are things that we retain. Okay. So how can we work with the skills that the person has retained and not focus less on the loss? Yeah, that's what we want to think about today. So what strategies, so thinking about the language changes, losing what we lose on the left and what we retain on the right, what are some strategies that we can do to support a person's language skills? Now, you guys would have heaps of ideas, so please pop them in the chat. Show them exactly. Yes. So don't just rely on words. Sandra, excellent. We can show people things. We can use some visual cues. Keep it simple, clear with gestures. Exactly. If you're going to lose 1 in 4 words at the early stage of dementia, how about we use less words? Yeah, so we get our message across in a simple, clearer way, and we put some gestures in place too. Great, great ideas. So some tips that we can put in place that are really simple is time. Yeah, just allow time. We saw all the changes happening to the brain. And so the connections, need a little bit more time. So allow 3 to 5 seconds for a response. Use less words, use more visual cues. Watch your tone. Yep. And show patience. Exactly. Yes. Watch your tone. The person won't understand your words necessarily, but will understand your tone. And tap into strengths. What remains? Social chit chat, counting, music, rhythm. Yep. And for you guys to remember, language on the left, rhythm on the right. We lose on the left and we retain on the right. So that's a little saying that you can share with your team as well. Okay. Now we're going to touch on responsive behaviours now and communication. And yes, we know that the terminology has changed to change behaviours, but at Thrive, we like to use the term responsive because we believe that it describes what we're seeing. A person who is responding to something in their environment. Yep, the way that they respond to that stimulus has everything to do with the challenges that they are having in communicating their needs and wants. Yep. So what has communication got to do with responsive behaviours? Yeah. Perfect. That's why Dementia Quiet is so important. It is, because we're tapping into the strengths that remain, aren't we? It's such a positive thing. And I mean, singing generally makes you feel great. I know it does for me, even if I can't sing. Okay, I can see Sandra typing. Thank you. That's all right. As an OT, I like to use this model, and it's about the person, the occupation, and the environment. When we think about the person, we consider their skills, their abilities, their limitations, their health issues, etc. When we look at the occupation, we think about the task or activity that the person might be engaged in. And the environment is our surroundings, the physical environment and the people in our environment, us. Okay, we are in other people's environments. Yeah. So could our approach and the way we communicate be a trigger for responsive behaviours? It can. Despite our well-meaning intentions, we may be a trigger for the way a person living with dementia responds. And this will be seen as a responsive behaviour. It could be the way we approach a person, where we stand, how we talk, what words we use, our tone. Our well-intended meanings may not compensate for the changes occurring in the brain of the person living with dementia. So to better support the person living with dementia, we need to change and adapt our approach to accommodate their changing needs. Okay. So how we see a person react, the responsive behaviour, is a response to a stimulus. It might be a response to an emotional expression of need or a physical unmet need. Okay, but the person is trying to tell us something. But the areas of the brain that would usually help them to put together a well thought out, rational, appropriate sentence and isn't working as it usually would. Okay, this area here, the frontal area. Yeah. So really, they're responding to let us know they're unhappy with something or something is making them feel uncomfortable. Yeah. But it's up to us to get curious about what that person is trying to tell us with the skills and strengths that remain. So we need to think about, what is the person trying to tell us through their behaviour, or what is the trigger of this behaviour that we're seeing? Yep. And stress can impact how we all communicate. So let's think about a time when we may have been stressed, when you might have been stressed yourself. What happened to your communication skills? Are you always able to communicate in a reasonable and rational way? I know I'm guilty not of being able to do that when I'm under stress. Yeah. And the same thing happens for people living with dementia. Okay. Except it's an additional layer of difficulty, isn't it? Because we've already got a brain that's experiencing challenges, yeah, with communication, and the stress on top can impact that even further. So when we are stressed, we go into what we call survival mode, that old fight and flight feeling. We can feel tension starting to build up, our body tightens, we actually hold our breath. And when we hold our breath, less oxygen gets to our brain. Yeah. And what happens? Our emotional control center in our brain is impacted. This is the part of the brain that helps us make good decisions. Stress has the same effect for someone living with dementia as well. Yeah. Now I want to show you a PET scan. Okay. And here you can see the areas in red show brain activity. Yeah. The areas that are blue and purple have very limited activity, and purple is no tissue. Yeah. So you'll see here there's a healthy brain, a brain with early Alzheimer's, a brain with late Alzheimer's, and a child. Okay. So when we get stressed, we still have our executive functioning skills here, the skills that help us make rational decisions. They stop us acting impulsively. Yeah. These are the skills that may stop us telling someone what we really think about them or giving someone a whack when we're angry. Yeah. But for people living with dementia, they have changes in these areas. Yeah, they have changes to their frontal lobe. It's one of the first areas to change with dementia, and they don't have the ability to think rationally or to control impulses or to consider safety. Yeah. So now let's have a look at this PET scan. Yep. And you can see the area circled in white is that prefrontal cortex. It's that executive functioning area where those rational skills are. Yeah. The area circled in black is the primitive brain. It's called the hippocampal area. And it's the area that is responsible for keeping us safe. It's our flight or fight, our fright or hide and seek response. Yeah. What do you notice looking at the PET scan? So, what do you notice for someone with early Alzheimer's or late Alzheimer's? Yeah. Where is the activity? Where is the red? I can see Kath typing. Yes. So there's much more activity in the primitive brain. Exactly. So you can see that white area at the front of the brain. There is less activity in early Alzheimer's. We're starting to lose those skills, those rational, logical thinking skills. In late Alzheimer's, there's pretty much no activity there. But you'll see in both the black circle, the primitive brain, where the hippocampi is, our fright or flight, yeah, the area that keeps us safe. It's still firing. Yeah. So we can't control our impulses or make rational decisions or have awareness of safety or having awareness or insight into others, but we have the ability to keep ourselves safe. Yeah. Our fight, flight, flee, hide, and seek impulses, they're still working. Yeah. So noting these changes, what might you see for someone living with dementia if they get scared or angry or receive a fright? What might you see? We might see that they act out a physical response. Exactly. Yeah. If I'm scared, yeah, and I might hit out, or I might wander looking for someone that makes me feel safe. Yeah. Or I might want to be around you the whole time because you're the person that makes me feel safe. So I'm going to be shadowing you and Kath. I'm going to be staying with you all day because you make me feel safe. And for some reason, I'm not feeling safe. Yeah. So we still have the ability for that fright flight mechanism. So it's really important to regulate stress for ourselves as carers, but for also this can be for the person living with dementia as well, because the person living with dementia will pick up on our body language and our tone. And if we're stressed, yeah, it could lead to them, that stress leading to them. So it's easy for stress to escalate. So it's easy to say just breathe, yeah, but there is evidence to why breathing is important because when we are stressed, we can hold our breath, which stops oxygen getting to our brain and we won't make great decisions. So if we can breathe, we're going to get more oxygen to our brain. Yeah. And sometimes a way to breathe is to laugh. Yeah. Because laughing actually helps us get air in, yeah, to our brain. So we can do that. So remember when you're stressed, take a break, try and get a breath, and humor can help. But it can also help physically get some oxygen to your brain, and it might help the person living with dementia that you're supporting as well. So, really, some questions for you to consider when you're supporting people living with dementia. How can you maximize skills to help that person remain as independent or use the skills that remain? How can you engage with the person to use their retained skills? And how can you adapt your approach to really set yourself up for success and the person that you're supporting up for success? And we do love this quote from Teepa Snow: dementia does not rob someone of their dignity, but it's our reaction to them that does. Yeah. So, in summary, today was really just a taster that human communication is very complex. There are so many parts of the brains required for successful communication, and brain change can make communication difficult. However, people living with dementia do retain skills, and we really need to tap into those for successful engagement and connection. We can be a trigger for changed behaviours despite our best intentions, and stress impacts all our brain. So, as a carer, we need to make sure that we can manage our own stress and help support a person living with dementia to avoid or manage their stress as well. And if we don't change our communication and our approach, nothing will change. So, a bit of food for thought there. Now, our education is based on Teepa Snow's positive approach to dementia care. And Teepa, the positive approach to care is all about the relationship coming first, not our agenda, which is what we want to get done. We need to put that in our back pocket. The other thing is that we are a big key to making life better for both of us, ourselves and the person living with dementia. And we know that people living with dementia are doing the absolute best that they can, and so are we. Yeah. But unless we choose to change, nothing will change. So, how can we adapt our approach for better engagement, communication, and connection? Now, if you like this training, we are doing more training coming up at the end of the month. We have a 3-hour program on the 24th of June. It is all about understanding brain and sensory changes for people living with dementia and how you can adapt your approach and learn some practical strategies to really help a person use their remaining skills and abilities and to maximize really positive connection. So when we send out the slides, we'll put a link to this training. If you're interested, you can take a look at that as well. We love feedback. So we've got this QR code where you can provide us with some feedback on how you thought today went, and if there's any other topics you might like free training on, because we run a monthly free webinar. We'll also put a link to the feedback survey in the comments as well. But thank you so much for jumping on today. It was great to have you on here. We will stop the recording and we will still be on if you want to ask any questions.